So, hello and welcome to this episode of UX Conversations, in which we invite our guests to share insights about the work and expertise, and of course, about their thoughts about the design industry and about the current developments that are shaping the UX design domain, and of course, their work as well. My name is Arko Rudolph. I'm director of the UX Design Awards and head of strategy at International Design Center Berlin. I hope that today's talk will inspire you and that you can take something away for your own field of activities and your career. In this episode, I'll be speaking to Sofia Ryan. She's Principal Director for Design Strategy at Microsoft and coming on board for the UX Design Awards jury. And so, by the way, just let me repeat this. If you're working on exceptional experiences, then why not have your work reviewed by Sofia and our expert jury panel? So you still have time until the end of May to send in your work. So forgive this short ad message and let me warmly welcome you, Sofia. It's great to have you. It's early in the morning, but it's wonderful that you could make it. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Sofia, you're looking back at an impressive career. Took you from research and design roles to leading projects and teams. You have designed, among many other things, the surgery environment in a large clinic in Norway before moving on to the tech sector. You have led UX and product teams in startups and corporate spin-offs and specialized in building software as a service, B2B solutions. And currently, you're the principal director for design strategy at Microsoft, where you work with AI and the Microsoft Copilot. So can you tell us a little bit about your background, your story? How did it develop? How did you get where you are now? And what is it that you're currently doing at Microsoft?
When I was a design student, I was deeply conflicted about design and being a designer. Even though the program I studied at really focused on solving problems for real users, I still felt that in essence, we were designing for the few privileged. Being born and raised in Norway, but having parents who were immigrants coming from a developing country, I was very aware of the inequalities in the world. And I was concerned that, the conditions and the resources in a huge part of the world isn't nowhere anywhere like what we experience in, for example, Scandinavia. And a way for me to create purpose through design was to start doing design projects for marginalized people in developing countries. In my master's thesis, I worked with people with disabilities in India and Nepal, together with Save the Children's Research Fund. And in my PhD, I continued on working with people using prosthetic legs in Cambodia, together with the International Red Cross community. This was really rewarding work, but it's also challenging to be a researcher who always has to travel. And I also had this inherent fear that I would end up as one of those professors who had never set their foot outside of academia. So to get more hands-on experience with design, I had to go out of my comfort zone. And I started working in various companies, getting more and more experience as a design practitioner. And I still had this super drive that I needed to work with design that didn't only have commercial goals. So I kept on doing side projects at the Oslo University Hospital, working with design for hybrid operating rooms. These are advanced operating rooms where you use imaging technology to guide the surgical team during procedures. And in a complex cardiac surgery setting, you can have a surgical team that consists of at least 10 participants. And they have to find efficient, super clear ways of communicating with each other. And at the same time, they have to monitor many screens and interfaces to make informed decisions that really impact life or death. And most of these interfaces aren't really developed with cognitive load, situational awareness, mental effort, or in usability in general in mind. So there's massive room for improvement here. As I grew more experienced as a design practitioner, I also became more interested in design leadership. Because no matter where I went, I to a various degree found the same type of challenges. Companies would invest a lot in getting the best design talent on board. They would have amazing designers. And yet, design teams often found themselves feeling very isolated and not having adequate impact on the strategic directions for the products and services that they were designing. And so curiosity about these challenges, how do they appear, why, and what can we do about them, led me to design leadership, which for me is all about how you structure and organize design teams so that they can be efficient and have a lot of impact. How can you leverage the voice of design internally so that design doesn't just become a tactical or pure operational endeavor, but really impacts strategic work? And for me, design leadership is also a lot about how do you create the conditions for design and space for designers to do their best work. And now, Ake, as you said, I work in Microsoft, also with design leadership. I work in the Fluent AI team, which is a central design team that looks at AI-enabled solutions across the entire M365 product suite. And we work with developing frameworks and guidance. We do concept work together with other teams, and we help create strategies for AI through partnering with other disciplines and other teams within Microsoft. In recent years, we've been focusing on our efforts on the Microsoft Copilot, which is all about enabling people to do their tasks in a more efficient and smarter manner, but also enable them to reach their personal and professional goals, and it seeks to amplify your abilities.
So, Sophia, thank you a lot for this intro and the description of a lot of work in different fields that you did. And I found it quite interesting to hear from you. Of course, many design leaders and many designers, design teams are struggling with this. But in your experience and looking back at how you structured the work of design teams, you mentioned that it's important to create space for designers to be able to work strategically, not just tactically or on the end outcome of products. So how did you go about this, and what do you think is can a design leader do to create space for design in a big company?
A lot of it is about offloading designers. So you take some of the more top-heavy battles, but it's also about making sure that information also goes to the design team and vice versa, the other direction,
Right.
that design teams are able to convey their message higher up. And it's a lot of educational parts to this, helping leaders and other disciplines understand how designers work, but not create a situation where it has to be on our terms. This is just the way we do it. We also need to keep evolving design and adapt to how the business work and how other disciplines reflect. So if we apply our user research skills, we get to learn about the needs of other stakeholders in the company, and then we create a situation where we understand each other a bit better, where there's empathy on both sides, and we can infuse our design methodology in a way where we don't say this is the gold standard and this is the way we do it, otherwise we don't work with you. But this is how we propose to work, and there's a reason why. And then we also take, for me, it's very important that designers are also willing to learn from other disciplines. There's tons especially now in the era of AI, there's tons for us to learn from others, because suddenly design as we know it might be changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also believe that really in-depth user research is at the core of not only design, but also business. Is that right?
Absolutely. As we know, good design equals good business. People are much more invested in spending resources, time, effort, and money on using products and services that actually solve their challenges and meet their needs. But how can we really create human-centered solutions if we don't take the time to get to know our users, understand their desires, their needs, their wants, their challenges? We could, of course, just assume that we know it all, but that really takes away the whole empathy part of being a designer, right? We can assume that we are a representative for everyone else. And once or twice, we might get lucky. We might be able to create something that consumers really love. But in most cases, this is a very risky approach to adapt.
In terms of getting proper user research executed and done in a large organization, there is often challenges in the business context that there is not enough space for user research. Do you see that this is a problem? Why?
Absolutely. So most business leaders will proclaim profoundly that they support user research. User research is important. And I believe that they really mean it when they say it. But when it comes down to it, and the choice is between bringing something to the market as quickly as possible, being able to launch quickly, or spending time on doing user research, speed often wins the battle, right? Obviously, because there's fierce competition and it's all about being first. But it's very easy to confuse speed with being agile and productive and efficient. Launching something creates tangible results that are always landing very well with important stakeholders, such as upper leadership, investors, board members, and so on. But one thing is to just make something really fast. Another thing is to ensure that what we're making is really the right thing. Another challenge is obviously related to budgets. And if you're going to do a bit more, allow me to say, simple user research, where you're asking for funding to do X amount of interviews, that's easy to create a specific timeline and budget for. But if you're exploring new territory and you need to do more foundational, in-depth user research, you might not be able to create a very specific upfront plan. You can propose a plan, but you also need to have the wiggle room to deviate from that. You have to be opportunistic in your approach, try something, but also be willing to take some steps back and reframe your approach if the first one is not working. So you're both optimistic, but you're also willing to work in an iterative way. And that's a much harder sell because you can't always pinpoint how long time this will take and how exactly you will find results. And this way of working just doesn't mesh well with how businesses are structured and how decisions about budgets and timelines usually are made.
And what did you find helps to get this wiggle room, this leeway that is necessary?
Sometimes you have to almost fake that you have a bit more specific planned in mind than you have. You have to trust the process and you need to know that we have the tools, so we will arrive at specific results. But maybe we have to help the organization feel that there's a bit more concrete plan. So sometimes that's a way of selling it in. And another, I mean, you really also have to then be able to deliver, right? And you do that by making sure that you have really great user research competence on board within your team who knows how to do this. But obviously, it's always risky not to know exactly how it will look in the end. This is also a problem for design teams, right? Because we don't start with defining the solution. We don't start by creating a proposal. This is what we will make. Rather, we explore the problem phase. So this is not a challenge that only user researchers have to deal with. It's also a challenge that we as designers are very, very used to, unfortunately.
And it also very neatly relates to now the domain that you're working in, and many people are working in, which is working with AI technology, that is evolving so constantly and quickly, and that we actually don't know yet about the application fields we will exactly, or the products that we will exactly have in months and years, not to speaking of years. So it's even more of a challenge to design for something that is full of unknowns, both known unknowns, but also unknown unknowns, which are and then this is where design research comes in very handy, you think, doesn't it?
Exactly. Because now more than ever, we need to be able to embrace ambiguity. And if you think about it, we as designers and user researchers are trained to do this. We are always encouraged to have a beginner's mind, not make assumptions, approach things in an open way and with curiosity, and then explore, test, verify as we go. So even though many designers feel quite daunted by all the unknowns in this AI landscape, we're actually very well positioned for working in this space. In design thinking, we talk a lot about being able to navigate through the fog. And as you say, Ake, research just becomes even more important in this era because we have to really dare to explore and understand. It's very easy to assume that, we can just look at communication patterns between the AI and the human and just apply usability perspectives to how to do this in a good way. But then we're automatically assuming that we know how people would like to interact and communicate with AI solutions, and that there's really like one straightforward way of doing it. There's a beautiful piece of work coming that was just recently published by the researchers at Stanford. And they looked at how cultural models shape how we perceive what we want from AI, how we perceive AI, what we want from AI, and how we like to communicate with AI. So in this particular study, they were, among others, looking at Chinese participants and North American participants. And they found that the Chinese participants actually were not so concerned about controlling the AI in comparison to North American participants. For them, it was much more important to feel connected to the AI. Versus the North American participants, they definitely wanted to be in control. They didn't want the AI solution to show signs of autonomy or emotions in any way. And they link it to cultural models, explaining that in Eastern Asian societies, there's this notion of the self being connected with the surrounding world, with other living beings, but also objects, which transcends to AI. So we're all related, we all influence each other, and we have these mutual relationships. Whereas in the Western world, our notion of the self is more independent. We believe that our goals, our preferences come from internal drive forces, and we are not always seeing ourselves as being connected to the physical surrounding in the same way. And I bring this up because it just shows that culture cannot be an afterthought. It's an imperative to success. And we need to dare to go into social cultural aspects of technology to unpack this if we really want to succeed with creating human-centered AI solutions.
So it's not really the question about the interface or about the data even, but it's much more about feelings that we might have and how comfortable we are using technology.
I think this is always an aspect with all technology development. Let me come with a short anecdote from my own research. When I was doing my PhD and master thesis, as I mentioned earlier, I was working in developing countries. And I worked with different type of assistive devices, but in my PhD research, the main focus was on prosthetic legs. And if you think about it, a prosthetic leg is in many ways the most utilitarian assistive device you can think of. If you can enable a person to walk from A to B without feeling physical discomfort, you would think that everything is okay, right? Mission accomplished. And this was really the viewpoint of many of the local NGOs that were providing prosthetic legs to people in these countries. They knew that that the feedback from users isn't always positive and that there's some concerns, but they would quite often brush away this feedback as being funded in just, let me say, more superficial or just aesthetical preferences. And it's easy to think in that way, right? Because we're giving something to you that enables you to walk so you can have a work, a profession, and you can study. But then you're just concerned about how this prosthetic leg looks like. When I was interacting with users and trying to unpack this, I learned that this was absolutely not superficial aesthetical needs. They were cultural needs, and you need to understand the culture and the social structures in the communities where the object will be used to understand this. So, for example, in India, users' prosthetic legs would often be suspended with leather belts. So they were attached to the residual limb with leather belts, which makes absolutely sense from an engineering point of view. Leather is cheap, is readily available, and is easy to repair it even in rural areas. But in many Hindu communities, any animal product is thought of as being impure. So a person using a prosthetic leg would suddenly go from being a person with a disability to also be an impure person and could be denied access to private homes and temples. And this created a lot of barriers for them.
Mm-hmm.
I also worked with children in Cambodia explaining to me that they wanted their prosthetic feet to have toes that look like toes and that the color should just match their skin tone exactly. Again, can be brushed away as an aesthetical concern coming from a child. But then children would also tell me that if people could easily see that they were disabled, they will also make comments about that this child must have done something in the previous life, like being a soldier who has killed many people for deserving this fate in this life. When you go deeper and beyond pure functional needs, you understand that this is not just a tool that's attached to your body. It's actually a way for you to interact and function in your community. And I bring up this example with prosthetic legs because it's just so easy to think in very simplistic, reductionistic terms. And we can do the same mistake when it comes to AI solutions, right? What if I can easily type in or with voice explain, this is what I need, and just get it out from the AI? Isn't that all we want to accomplish? But then it's always about feelings, it's about cultural models and norms, and it's about the values we embed into these systems, either consciously or unconsciously. So whenever we design for AI, we have to think about what type of societies are we creating through technology, and also what type of futures are we building. I really love the quote from the Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan. He says, we make tools and then the tools make us. And that's something to remember in this era of AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a enormous challenge to understand the culture, the place in different continents when you don't have the ability to be there as you did and do in-depth research within the space that a PhD gives you. How can a team that's maybe working in a startup, in a smaller company, or even in a large company, but with a design center in one place, do the user research or understand these substances, these nuances, cultural nuances, maybe of users in other places that might use their product, because that's the situation with most digital products nowadays, right?
Yeah, you bring up a very valid concern, right? Because the PhD gives you a framework to go and do very in-depth work. But in my professional life, I have always applied the teachings from my PhD. But then you, of course, have to scale down and you don't have to be as rigorous as when you're going to publish research findings. But what I say to design teams and research teams always is anything you do is way better than nothing. And yes, you don't have to go and spend several years in the field, but you can still talk with people. The best is to meet people, but we're so fortunate we also have online ways to connect with people, and we can be creative in finding avenues to connect with people even across physical distances. But anything you do to get a bit deeper into the conditions for use of technology, where you just don't look at pure functional usability aspects, but also cultural and social aspects, would be extremely rewarding. And it will directly also impact your chances for succeeding with whatever you're making. Another thing to bring up is that even if you do lengthy research, you spend years and years, you can never fully understand the unknowns. And in the field of AI, everything is moving so fast. So it's not about doing heavy waterfall type of upfront research. You can also use the teachings from lean experimentation. How can you validate the most critical assumptions? Can you create very low-tech, easy experiments? Or can you create either low or high fidelity prototypes or even MVPs that are made not to just get into the market fast, but also to learn? Because when we put something in the hands of the users, they will always surprise us, and they will use something in ways we couldn't foresee. And so we can invite users through having these learning sessions and not maybe launch fully to the whole wide world, but to a limited set of users, we can actually facilitate for co-creation with the users, which also is a very efficient way of designing when there's so many things we just cannot foresee.
So is there still staying with AI technology as is really, as we said, evolving extremely fast? Do you think designers would need additional skills beyond the user research skills that we already have? Or is there more an ample set of abilities that you would have to develop, or maybe not abilities, but ways of thinking or questioning what you're thinking at while you develop, while you work?
For me, it's important to actually highlight that designers have a lot of the skill sets that are critical to succeeding in the AI space. And that's why I think that designers should lead conversations around AI. It's so easy for us to think that, hey, this needs heavy engineering, and engineers will figure out how this should be built and function. But our role as designers is to bring purpose into the space of AI so that AI is designed in a responsible and thoughtful way. And when I say we have a lot of the skill sets, I'm thinking about being able to navigate through ambiguity, as we talked about before. I'm thinking about our ability to facilitate cross-disciplinary co-creation. We're trained at bringing experts from different fields together and lead them through creative and analytical processes. And this is about being able to create shared visions, but also to solve problems together. Because in the field of AI, it's not like only design skills are needed or only engineering skills are needed. We need to bring together many, many disciplines that might not have worked together closely before. And we should also leverage our storytelling skills. As you mentioned, Aki, there's so many unknowns and unknown unknowns. And what we can do through storytelling is to help envision how could the future look like? How could potential desired effects and impacts be? And how could the undesired impacts potentially play out? So we can drive conversations around risk and mitigation. And all of these skills have never been as important as before. Another thing that we bring to the table is our ability to be the voice of the users, to advocate for them. And again, I cannot think of a time where this has been more important than now, that we bring the concerns of users, the concerns that nobody knows that we have yet, right? Because there's so many potential unintended consequences of technology if it ends up in the wrong hands or are used with harmful intentions in mind. So we have to be there to advocate that these systems become trustworthy, that they're transparent, that even though I press a magical button, I still understand the limitations of these systems and understand how they work and why they give me certain output. And that these systems become inclusive and promote fairness. It's so easy to embed unfair biases into AI solutions, even with the best of intentions.
Do you really think, if I get it right, that designers can actually have a big influence on the development of AI-enabled products by bringing in user perspectives about potential fears or hesitations, and by thus steering the development or at least awareness about risks and fears into the development?
That's right. I think we have a vital role to play in this field because we are trained already to do these things. We are trained to unpack different facets, create concepts that are not just geared towards saying this is how the solution would be, but also to drive conversations. And you would think that you can create guidelines and principles that you can just tick off as you go. But the most important thing here is to drive conversations, that we keep on reflecting throughout the entire design process. We might never be able to foresee everything, but we have to put our best foot forward and we have to engineer and design and craft the systems in a very thoughtful and responsible way.
So how can we actually create awareness about risks that are around us based maybe on AI technology? Did you come up or come across any projects where you'd say, well, this is where through the creative work of design, um, awareness can be built, and through storytelling, awareness about risks and potential biases can be built?
I think there's a lot of inspiration to be found for more artistic and explorative work that has been done in the AI field. And one piece of work that I find particularly inspirational is done by the photographer Ben Khalifa and the MIT professor Fox Harrell, What they did was to create an experience through VR and AI technology where you, as a user or a participant, can interact with people on both sides of a combat. So they look at the conflict situations in Gaza, in El Salvador, and also in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And you, based on your body language, the system would use that as a proxy for your attitudes and your bias and give you experiences that made it more likely that you got empathy with the other side and understood where they're coming from. And so it's a beautiful example of that you can also use AI to challenge people's biases and help us expand our horizons. You know, I like to say that AI is just like any other tool or technology. It's neither good or bad. It's all about the intentions you have with it. A surgical knife can be used to perform a critical procedure that can prolong your life, but it can equally easily be used to take someone's life. It's all about the intentions. And so also with AI, the technology itself is never evil. It's just how we put it to use and what type of intentions do we have.
Yes, and you also said that you're pretty optimistic about AI in this sense, and comes through in your last remark. So what are you looking forward to? What do you see as biggest windows maybe of opportunities?
There are extraordinary amounts of opportunities here. I think within healthcare, there's no doubt when it comes to making diagnoses quicker and getting it right faster. There's vast amount of opportunities, drug discovery, of course, but also when it comes to areas such as education, where traditionally everyone in a classroom setting have received the same teaching materials, the same slides, the same books, the same articles. Whereas now it's much easier for students and teachers to generate learning materials and resources that are tailored to each individual's needs and skills and learning preferences. And this can be a massive game changer in the context of education, where people with different learning abilities and people who might have felt that they didn't succeed within the rigid structures of formal education now have more opportunities. Another area which is extremely interesting is how we can use AI to enhance our creativity and also finds avenues for artistic expressions. Already you have AI solutions like Midjourney or DALI that makes it much more easier to co-create with the AI, to express yourself in a creative way and explore yourself as a creative being. I think this will just grow as a field, and it will become even more easy to prompt the systems and co-create with them.
Yeah, that's true. Fascinating. And there's a lot of potential positive outcomes. There's, of course, many that we don't know about yet. We also hear very negative things lately about facial recognition being used to select targets in war. But just not talking about such extremes and doomsday scenarios, still there is a lot of actual current pressure on the design industry, on the design professional, through the advent of AI technology, a lot of insecurity, layoffs, especially in the States, but in many tech areas. Um, you're working in this area in a big corporation as a designer. Um, is can you take the fear away somehow from the design profession, especially maybe from people who are not in the mid-20s at the moment, and might be a little bit hesitant about where the industry is going, where the craft is going. What are the skills that people should think about, should develop? But maybe also what are overblown fears on parts of the design community about being made obsolete by AI technology, or just being not quick enough to adapt. What do you think?
I think adaptability is key, right? We know that AI is here to stay, and so we shouldn't feel like we don't want to be part of designing AI. That's why I advocate that we have a lot to contribute with. We have a lot of the skill sets. The design profession might change in terms of that there are certain design abilities that are less critical. They're still there as a foundation, but they become less critical, designing something to be pixel perfect, more kind of low stake design tasks that are repetitive. Of course, they can be automated. And there are solutions out there now helping designers create better color schemes, faster check for accessibility flaws, and so on. But we can think of those as just aids. They are helping us do better design work and design more efficiently. There are parts of the design profession you simply cannot replace that easily. And that's related to critical thinking, right? Because we bring critical thinking to the process. AI can generate tons of ideas, and research has shown that if you look at number of ideas and how original the ideas is, they can outperform 99% of the human population. But what AI cannot do is to assess the usefulness or the appropriateness of an idea. And I read a research report that said this so eloquently, because they said that AI has creative potential. It can generate a concept, but creative potential is something else than creative achievement. So putting an idea into play, executing it, and not just doing it, but putting all the critical thinking that comes with it to make ethical sound decision. That's something you just cannot leave to any type of technical system. So it means that our focus as designers might change a bit, and we need to go more into the strategic and creative thinking aspects of design.
Does this relate to the ongoing conversation about regulation, not regulation, guardrails? I mean, ethics, it goes at first glance way beyond the design profession or what designers do, but actually it's not that far away, is it?
No, it's not so far away, because it also impacts what the company can make and how it should make it, right? And we usually work within companies, so we need to be aware of these regulations. Since the AI field is moving so fast and we don't even know what's on the horizon, it's impossible to create any policy or regulations that will cover all type of risk or all facets of AI. But I still applaud any attempts to put our best foot forward and try to create regulations, because what this does is to convey a message. It puts a spotlight on the risk and it elevates our awareness. But since regulations never can cover it all, it's also important for all companies to have a set of AI principles, to have processes that drives the difficult conversations, so that we are creating things in a thoughtful way and doing our best. Even though we might not be able to safeguard everything 100%, still we have to do our best. And I think that this has to become a part of design education, because we as designers should have a commitment, a personal commitment, regardless of where we are working, to always uphold certain ethical standards. when we bring something into the world, we're accountable for being part of that process. We can't just blame companies or governments, right? We're all accountable for our contributions. And even just as users, we're accountable because as users, as consumers, we have to challenge and dare to ask critical questions. And so, in short, my answer to an extremely big question, which we could talk about probably for another hour, is that you can't regulate yourself away for having to be critical and cautious. And that's something that the responsibility for that you find on a macro level, but you also find it on a micro level and with each single individual and design practitioner and design leader.
Yes, which comes down to what you mentioned before. It's about actual designing for a useful solution which meets the needs of people, but also respects them culturally and adapts to the take up or their fears, their hesitancy. So bringing this up through insights and research at least drives a discussion within a company. Of course, the discussion should be much broader, which I like what you said, that through discussion about regulation, at least we start as a society also to reflect a little bit about what our ethics, and this is a very, very necessary and valuable discussion, because it's not down to just solutions, applications, but it's really what they are meant for. And in the end, it's not about creating new regulation. It's just about reflecting what do we actually want to have and why, right? And this is a very design-related question.
Absolutely. I mean, our job is to create systems that allow for cultural diversity, that promote inclusiveness and fairness. And through regulations, governments are pinpointing that these aspects are important. It's not a free for all. It's not enough just to have innovation goals or commercial goals. We do have to think about social impact and the greater good. Just by putting out regulations such as the European AI Act, suddenly we got all these discussions going in a way more specific way than before. And we can pinpoint a lot of shortcomings, we can criticize parts of the act, but at least we have something tangible to criticize.
And that's very important to have a focus for your discussion. And another very interesting regulation concerning design in Europe is also coming up next year, which is the Accessibility Act, which says that any product, whether digital, physical, has to be as accessible as possible to a wide variety of users. And now the challenge to design is, or to designers, is not just to create a list of checkboxes in terms of font sizes, contrast, etc., but actually to maybe reflect about how to make accessible interactions, new forms of interactions, actually so interesting and so attractive that they make products both accessible and sexy and successful by doing so.
When it comes to accessibility, we really have to think wider about this because since AI brings with it so much potential power, it can also become something that promotes inequality. Who has access to this technology versus who doesn't? We were talking about developing countries previously, and there is a challenge around this because AI solutions at right now do need high levels of connectivity and computing power. So unintentionally, we could very easily widen the technical divide through who has access and who has not. And that's something to think about too.
Right. And this is also about more maybe a regulatory, or in the sense of regulation is just the outcome of a social discussion, an important issue to discuss socially, which I think only bigger bodies than companies can push forward, also the NGO sector and so, etc. And it also comes down to, well, yes, the role of design being critical and having a role of raising flags and actually bringing awareness to a product discussion about relevance, about it being necessary or not necessary, but also responsible, and also responding to different, maybe cultural, as you said before, needs, hesitancies. So, Sophia, you're also coming on to the jury for the next award. So I'd like to just connect this discussion to the judging, because actually at the core of the jury is always a discussion about the relevance of a product. Is there a necessity for it? And is it responsible, and so on and so on. So I'd like to ask you personally about your reasons for becoming a juror, and what are you looking for?
I said yes to being a juror because I think it's a great opportunity to give back to the design community and to recognize and celebrate great design. I feel very similar to being a juror as I feel to treat when I agree to be a mentor. Because as a mentor, there's a time commitment and an effort on my part. But what I get in return is just so much bigger. The energy and everything I learn from the mentees. And I feel the same way about being a juror because, yes, I spend time and effort on this, but I get so much inspiration and energy, and I think that I also can learn so much from just seeing the amazing work being done out there. And yes, I will be looking for many of the aspects we've been talking about, even if the proposals aren't around AI still. Are they solving real users for real, not real users? Are they solving real problems for real users? And is it plausible that the solution will actually be successful? For doing that, you have to not just look at user needs and usability, but you also have to see if this is technically feasible. Is there a business angle? Have you thought about ripple effects? Will this lead to good consequences, not just for the person using it, but society in general? And if a project really celebrates cultural diversity and account for different cultural and social norms, that would be extra bonus points for sure.
Great, I agree with all of this with you, and I'm really looking forward to discussions. They're insightful, and it's actually also maybe in a small group of people, but it is actually the discussion that we need to have in the design community about things like relevance, responsibility, culture, but also outcomes, as you said, feasibility, not just claims, but actually is there a foundation research done, not just by the needs, but also about how is this going to work. So, Sophia, what should people send in when they submit in terms of information? What do you expect them to provide so you can make a sound judgment?
This is really where storytelling comes in handy. I want the story for the proposed product or service, the solution, but I also want the story for how you arrived at this solution. The story that makes me understand that this was done thoughtfully, that you thought about consequences, and that you were looking through a holistic lens, and that your decisions were grounded in actual insights. Make it easy to understand your journey and not just sell the product.
I couldn't agree more. Sophia, before we get out, is there anything that you would like to share with our community which inspires you at the moment, and what you would like to recommend to people Is there any books, films, I don't know, research or sources that you would really like people to take away with?
Yeah, right now I'm reading a wonderful book by Annie Duke. It's called Quit.
Mhm.
And you know, in our culture, we always celebrate perseverance, grit, and it's all about just keep on, keep on, keep on. And what she does in a very beautiful and research backed way is to highlight that to be successful, you also need to know when and how is it actually best to quit. We always talk about and we hear about the ones who made it to the peak of Mount Everest, and we might hear the stories about the people who died in the attempts to do so. But we don't hear about the people who made the right decision at the right moment to actually stop and go back down again so that they in the future could climb other mountains, which should be the ultimate goal, right? Not just to climb Mount Everest, but live on to also climb other mountains. And this might seem very, very far from all the other things we've been talking about today. But there is a lesson in here also for designers and everyone essentially that you try your best, but you learn as you go also from your failures. And whenever you are willing to stop or pivot, that's a celebration in itself. This is how we evolve as humans. There's so many examples of business that have gone totally wrong because people just weren't willing to quit. And we do this mistake in our personal lives as well with hobbies, relationships, or careers. And so the science behind knowing when to quit is actually an extremely useful tool to have.
I think it really connects well with the moment we are, maybe in many Western societies, and the reflections many people have, especially people who are coming into jobs now or have been working for a couple of years. And I think it's also connects very well to what you said before, that actually it's not about, especially thinking about designers, not about having more and more and more pressure building up on yourself, but also to saying, well, is there a limit for me in terms of critical thinking, responsibility? How far can I go along with this? And if it's too much, then maybe it's a good reason for me to step back and say I take a decision for me personally not to go along, and this also sends a message, and this is also about being responsible in design as well. So I really like
Right.
that you brought this up because it's probably the question whether we should quit. We'll be confronted with it much more often in life than about what do we want to achieve and how far do we want to go, and finding the right moment to be true to yourself and be with yourself is very important.
And why do we think of ourselves as failures if we
Yeah.
quit, right? Because, like Annie points out, when you quit, you free up resources to do something else, something that might be more right for you and more meaningful. And you learn from everything that led up to the decision to quitting. So it's not as failure. We need to actually celebrate it as a learning opportunity.
Take a break, reflect, and take the freedom to restructure your, let's say, compass, maybe your personal compass, what's right for you. Thank you very
Exactly.
much, Sophia, for this great talk. It was super insightful. We could go on forever, I think.
Thank you, Ake. It was great talking, and thank you for having me here.
So that's it for this edition of UX Conversation. Thank you very much for being with us. You can find many more insightful conversations, of course, on our website. And I hope that you enjoyed hearing from Sophia as much as I did. If you'd like to know more about the awards, jump to our website. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, wherever you are. And until next time, we say goodbye to you from Norway, where Sophia is at, and Berlin, when I'm sitting right now. Take care and see you soon at one of our next events. Bye bye.
Bye bye.